Apollo's Tree. The story of Daphne and Apollo. Based on the myth retold by Mary Pope Osborne. Background. In Greek and Roman myths, Apollo is a powerful god. Cupid, the god of love, shoots arrows at people to make them either fall in love or run away from love. As a young man, Apollo, the god of light and truth, found Cupid, the god of love, playing with one of his bows. "What are you doing with my bow?" Apollo asked angrily. "I've slain a great serpent with that weapon. Play with your own bow and arrows." "Your arrows may kill serpents, Apollo," said the god of love, "but my arrows can do worse harm. Even you can be wounded by them." With that ominous threat, Apollo flew away and landed on a mountain. Then he pulled 2 arrows from his quiver. One had a blunt or dull tip filled with lead. Whomever was hit by this arrow would run from anyone professing love. The second arrow was sharp and made of gold. The person it hit would instantly fall in love. In other words, Apollo is angry at Cupid for playing with his bow. After threatening Apollo, Cupid takes out 2 arrows. Cupid aimed his first arrow at Daphne, a beautiful nymph hunting in the woods. She was a follower of Diana, the goddess of wild things. Like Diana, Daphne loved freedom. She had wild hair and bare limbs. Cupid shot the blunt-tipped arrow at Daphne. The arrow became invisible in the air, and when it pierced Daphne's heart, she felt a sharp pain, but knew not why. Holding her hands over her wound, Daphne rushed to her father, the river god. "Father," she shouted, "promise me you'll never make me get married." The river god, confused by his daughter's request, called back, "But I wish to have grandchildren." "No, father, no, I never want to get married." "But I want you to marry," cried the god. "No!" screamed Daphne, sobbing. "All right," shouted the river god. "I promise I'll never make you marry." "Promise to help me escape my suitors," she cried. "I promise I will," called the river god. In other words, Cupid shoots Daphne with 1 arrow. Next, Cupid aimed his second arrow, the sharp, gold-tipped one, at Apollo. Just as the young god came upon Daphne, Cupid shot the arrow into Apollo's heart. The god instantly fell in love with Daphne. Even though she looked wild, Apollo thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "Hello!" he cried, but Daphne bolted away. Apollo ran after her, shouting, "Stay! Stay!" But Daphne fled as fast as the wind. "Don't run!" cried Apollo. "I'm not your enemy!" But Daphne continued running. "Stop!" Apollo cried. Daphne did not slow down. Apollo cried, "I am not a farm boy. I am Lord of Delphi, son of Jupiter. I've killed a great serpent, but I fear Cupid's weapons have wounded me worse." Daphne continued to run. Apollo grew tired of begging her to stop, so he picked up speed, running more swiftly than he'd ever run before. Apollo caught up with Daphne. Her strength gone, Daphne cried, "Help me, father!" Suddenly, her body turned to wood. Her hair became leaves and her feet roots. She had become a laurel tree. Apollo embraced and kissed the tree. Then he pressed his hands against the tree's trunk and wept. "I feel your heart beating," he said. "Since you can't be my wife, you'll be my sacred tree. I'll use your wood for my harp and arrows. I'll weave your branches into a wreath for my head. Heroes will be crowned with your leaves. You'll always be my first love." In other words, Cupid shoots Apollo with an arrow, and he falls in love with Daphne and begins chasing her. She runs from him.